Always true.
We ask the questions.
What is needed in the world
How will Europe resolve the problem of its massive public debt spiraling out of control? The deal brokered by European leaders recently requires about $1 trillion in additional funds. Details are sketchy, but consensus is that countries outside Europe will have to step in. In their quest for financial support, Europe's leaders have pinned most of their hopes on China. But here in Beijing, the government has been non-committal. The clearest statement yet about China's financial thinking has come from the offices of the China Investment Corporation. This is the home of China's sovereign wealth fund that controls a large portion of China's financial assets for foreign investment.
A lot of people say, well, Eurozone members on the periphery are having troubles. Why don't you come to help us invest?
Jin Liqun is supervisory chairman of the fund responsible for investing a part of China's vast reserves abroad. We met him to find out if he and his country are now willing to lend Europe a hand. Mr. Jin, thank you very much indeed for taking time to talk to us today.
My pleasure.
During the course of this conversation, I want to touch on a number of points. You are the head of China's Sovereign Wealth Fund, chairman of the International Forum of Sovereign Wealth Funds, both of which are becoming increasingly interesting players, shall we say, in the global financial market. I want to begin, though, if we might, with the subject that everyone is talking about right now, and that is Europe. The crisis in Europe is ready to, it seems, engulf so many different countries, so many different continents. And China is very much at the heart of what's going on. So please give us your perception of the problems that Europe is facing.
Well, during the current financial difficulties of the Eurozone members, at least Eurozone members on the periphery, there's much discussions about how the sovereign wealth funds could possibly do to contribute to stabilize the situation in Eurozone members, which is certainly a very important issue. But let me step back a little bit to talk about China sovereign wealth funds, the international forum, because it's very much relevant to the issues you talked about. Chinese sovereign wealth funds, CIC, China Investment Corporation, was set up in 2007 in response to the need of the Chinese government, broadly speaking, the Chinese people, the need to invest better the financial resources at our disposal. And this is a very important step forward in managing the accumulation of foreign exchange of our country over the 3 decades of fast development.
So when you have heads of state and financial regulatory authorities from Europe coming to Beijing and asking you to take a position in some of their financial assets, then you look at it as a financial manager, not as a politician. But what do you see when you look at it? I mean, does this look an attractive investment proposition?
We are required to behave as an independently operating company, just like any other sovereign wealth funds. So when we invest in a particular country, be it a developed country or developing country, the requirement is that you should work under the law of my country, fair enough. You should not interfere with some very sensitive issues, no question about that. The problem is, are we supposed to work as passive financial investor when we want to be, whereas some other governments would come to us and say, hey, we are in trouble, we need your resources, why don't you come in? Now, is this considered political or economic? So we keep telling the people, we operate independent of the state, of the Chinese state. We make our decisions purely on the basis of financial considerations. We do not meddle with political issues of any country in which we invest. We do not get ourselves involved in any sectors which are considered sensitive. We do everything in your country under your law. Okay, so you cannot come to me asking me to say, hey, why don't you put money in this projects, for instance, or investing in the banks which are in trouble, or investing some of the sectors which calls for foreign capital. because we are in trouble and our two countries are friendly countries, so why don't you come in? This is actually in stark contrast to the requirement imposed on sovereign wealth funds. So we operate on the basis of economic considerations, and we hope the recipient countries will also, treat us that way.
Can you just clarify that?
No, that's why, for instance, when you come to me, say, because we are friendly countries, now we are in trouble, why don't you put money in my country? What should be the answer of sovereign wealth funds?
Presumably, given what you're saying, is we will look at it as an investment in the same way as we do every other investment.
Exactly.
And so having done that, and I realize at this point that these are investment decisions are not necessarily things that you want to publicize, which is why I just wanted a broad perception of when you do look at it within that framework that you've described, what do you see as the investment potential there?
If the recipient country of the sovereign wealth funds of a particular country would like to welcome the capital injection into a particular sector, banking sector otherwise, which is perfectly all right in my view. The problem, if any, is that the recipient country should treat sovereign wealth funds fairly, equitably as any other financial investors. Which means you cannot try to keep them out of the door when you don't need it. And when you call them in and ask them to do this and that when you need money.
So are you suggesting there needs to be quid pro quo? Are you suggesting that the international community has its own responsibilities to bring to the table here, rather than simply asking you for money as a last resort? There should be a broader conversation.
If the sovereign wealth funds or any other financial investor are brought in as a last resort, it's all right as long as the deal is fair for both sides.
Which would involve reciprocation of some kind?
It's not kind of reciprocation. If the legal framework is perfect, okay, if all the necessary conditions for investors could be met, if both sides could benefit from this deal on an equal footing, I think you can say that's reciprocation, because the investors would like to have fair share of return. So in my view, let me put it in a different way. In some part of the world, some countries could be momentarily in trouble. That is certainly unfortunate for a particular country. But of course, this also creates opportunities for some other countries, so for the investors to come and help them out, which is perfectly all right in my view. And this is for win-win situation, right? So I would say right now in the Eurozone, some members are in deep trouble, but I have noted that the Eurozone members are working very hard to solve this problem. Now we have the latest news about the workout programs of the Greek debt, which is, in my view, very much welcome, and I hope this would help stabilize the market.
So at this point in the game, what are the considerations here? You may not necessarily look at it as being an ideal situation for China to get involved in, and yet if you don't, the dangers of not doing so could be even greater.
First of all, China has always been supportive of euro as the international reserve currency. I personally was in charge of the first Eurobond issuance by the People's Republic of China. That was right after euro came into being, to show our support for euro. And China is consistently supportive of the Eurozone economy, of Europe, in general. We think this is an important part of the global economy. And in a globalized economy, every participant, you like it or not, would have to share the weal and woe of the global financial benefit. So no question about that. We maintain a strong, cross-border investment and trade relations with North America, with Australia, with other parts of Asia, with Middle East, with Europe. And I think this is very much important. It's not just a win-win, it's a multi-win, situation. So there's no question at all that we in China are supportive of a strong, robust European economy. with regard to the, for instance, buying the bonds of some of the European countries, government bonds, or whether they should be investing in some of the banks which are threatened by the debt crisis. These are very practical, detailed transactions for any potential investors to consider. That's why I say there are different levels of support, different levels of involvement to be a responsible investor for the government, for the state. Any sovereign wealth funds will look at the investment opportunities, which I'm sure will be coming up from Eurozone members.
All perfectly understandable and all perfectly rational. However, there are many in Europe who do consider their own situation as being right on the brink. The situation right now, even after this apparent agreement between the leaders of Europe on how to save Greece and stabilize their economies, there are still some who say that this is a matter of postponing the crisis point for merely a matter of months. If there isn't some sort of much stronger commitment, for instance from the Chinese, then we really are at the point of disaster. So while I take on board all the rational perspectives you've brought here, there is going to come a point where a decision has to be made, and soon. And I know that you're not speaking on behalf of the Chinese government, but the question that everybody wants an answer to is China going to step in and play that role?
During my recent trip to Europe, to North America, I kept, conveying the consistent message. First of all, we in China are very much supportive of Eurozone, of Europe, and of Euro. We in China, we in CIC are actively looking for investment opportunities which would be good for both sides. And thirdly, we are upbeat about Europe, but in the first instance, Europe must be upbeat about itself. There's a whole range of reform measures which have to be done without further delay. Having 17 parliaments and governments will not give Eurozone members any excuse of not taking any actions. And this is the message. Because I think if you look at the troubles which happened in European countries, this is purely because of the accumulated troubles of the worn-out welfare society. I think the labor laws are outdated. The labor laws induce sloth, indolence, rather than hard working. The incentive system is totally out of whack.
You mean welfare?
Of course. So why should, for instance, within Eurozone, why should some people have to work until 65, even longer, whereas in some other countries they happily retire at 55, languishing on the beach? No, this is unfair.
You're speaking in many ways like one of the extreme capitalists of the United States.
Let me.
Are you suggesting that hardline capitalist approach is where Europe should be going now?
The welfare system is good for any society to reduce the gap, to help those who happen to be disadvantaged to enjoy a good life. But welfare society should not induce people not to work hard. So if you look at the European countries, history over the last 5 or 6 decades, you'll find this system would have to be adjusted.
I'm sure the Germans would take issue with that. Germany has an extremely successful economy.
We in China are working very hard. The Chinese people are working very hard to build up our nation, to move forward. So if you say, hey, European countries are in trouble, why don't you pour your resources in these countries in trouble? And our people would ask us a question, wait a moment, are you sure you can get a fair share of returns by your investment? Because this resource, this money is the result of the Chinese people who work very, very hard over the last 3 decades, ever since reform was launched. So this is a very much important issue.
You bring up a very interesting point, though, which is the operational basis, if I can put it that way, of Western capitalism entirely at fault here? Is the system broken? And what's the Chinese perspective on, I mean, you operate the second largest economy in the world right now, soon probably to become the largest, certainly the largest in terms of numbers. What are the correct balances of welfare, of support for the population, of hard work? How do you see an economic system functioning?
My view is no political or economic system would be good forever without any modification, because the system would have to be modified or fine-tuned to fit into the changed situations. In China, as you see, early in the days of the reform program, certainly all of the people were encouraged to work very hard. We have saying, get rich through your honest labor, honest work, because we need some people to get rich quick through their intelligence, hard work, entrepreneurship. That was the battle cry early in the days of reform. 3 decades later, we find some people got super rich, whereas some people, for various reasons, are not in a very good financial situation. So the government would like the people to understand we are in a new phase of development. We need to reduce the gap between the rich and the poor, between have and have-nots. Those who have made a lot of money for various reasons should understand they have managed to do that, not just because of the intelligence, because of the good policy. So they need to contribute more by paying taxes, by other kind of social donations or something of that kind. And the government is also helping the low-income groups to improve their earning capability through the better education of their children, through better social welfare. For instance, we abolished the taxes on farming. Okay, rural people don't have to pay taxes. Now, these kind of things, and we improve the infrastructure to reduce the gap. So that is why China at today's development stage would emphasize more on social harmonization, reducing the gap. This is the necessary step forward.
But in purely economic terms, I mean, what is it about the European system that China has decided not to follow? What are the pitfalls that have beset Europe that China thinks it should stay away from?
I think what is most important is to have very appropriate incentive system. We should not follow some of the bad examples of these kind of so-called welfare societies in which hard working is not encouraged. Now, if people who don't work would make as much as those who work hard, of course, this is invitation to indolence. This is not what we want to see. This is not what we want to see. So I think coming back to this issue, my idea is that as long as the Eurozone members would fix some of the economic, social problems, as long as they have a very credible, convincing work-out program, the outside world would have confidence, and responsible investors would come, stay there, and put money in some of the vital sectors to help revive the economy. This is very clear. So in the first instance, I hope the 17 parliaments in Eurozone members would work out a convincing, credible program.
Let me ask you one final question then. The subjects that we've been talking about have been within the context of recognition that the way the global financial economy, the global manufacturing economy works is changing. Some extremists would say the power has shifted from west to east. Others would put it slightly more conventionally. But within these changes that we've discussed, one of the points that China has made fairly frequently is this issue of reserve currency. You have called the euro and the dollar a reserve currency in this conversation. But do you think that there should be a different reserve currency?
Let me put it this way. If you look at the relative strength, economic strength of the North and South, East and West, there's a clear indication that the economic power has been shifted from North to the South, from the West to the East, because proportionately, the emerging markets are carrying more weight economically. There's no question about that. And because of the demographics, because of fast growth of the emerging markets over the last 2 or 3 decades. And this trend is going to continue. There's no question about that. But we have to understand one crucial point. The aggregates does not tell everything. The aggregates will tell you that you are bigger financially, economically, but does not mean your economic structure is better. Does not mean your real economic power is really very, very, superior. I don't think that is right. So we need to work together as members of the international community. Even though the emerging markets' overall economic power is far greater than the North, than the developed countries, this does not mean that now it's our time to tell you to do this and that. I don't think that is the spirit of international cooperation. We are all members of the international community. Countries, big or small, should work together on an equal footing. This is a very important point.
And it is an important point because it does seem that even though that power is shifting in various directions in terms of the economics, in terms of the amount of say those new countries have in the global conversation, that doesn't seem to be shifting much at all, does it?
If you look at the economic structure, you'll still find developing countries have a long way to catch up. Most of these emerging markets still agrarian, and they do not have high tech. The innovations, high technology still are, I think, in the hands of the developed countries. That's why we need to work together. Of course, emerging markets have to move up on the value chain to be more efficient in the consumption of energy, raw material, this kind of thing. The global production should be better rationalized. Okay, this is the first point. Secondly, if the emerging markets countries have more say in international affairs, that's not necessarily a bad thing. Because as you see, if you look at the major events over the last 2 or 3 decades, developed countries made a lot of mistakes. For instance, if you look at the way the Asian financial crisis were handled, some of the actual instructions turned out to be not very, very appropriate. So to have developing countries more say in international affairs, decision making, I think is pretty good. So we could, in my view, with the increased economic power of the emerging markets, there could be better dialogues, discussions in the international forum, like G20, IMF, and the World Bank.
But as Mr. Hu goes to the next G20 meeting, do you believe that China is given enough of a voice in the international forum, and is it treated equally enough under the current circumstances where global power is changing so much?
I would say China's being increasingly recognized as an important international player on a number of issues, international political, economic affairs, and I'm very happy that China's role is being recognized as very, very constructive, and will continue to do that. And I believe our leaders would do their utmost to help contribute to the international financial stability. Now, with regard to the second issue of the shifting in the balance of economic power, I would say the developer countries should feel relaxed because the increased economic wealth in the emerging markets would create better opportunities for the North to sustain their growth, and this is very much important. So I think the fundamental change is in the mentality of the traditional developed countries. They should welcome this, they should embrace this as a very good development, because finally, I would say, all members of the international community would have a chance to sit down and have very candid discussions on an equal footing. China is ready to play that role, and I hope China's constructive role will be better recognized, and I think this paves the way for our bright future, for all of us, for our future generations.
Mr. Jin, thank you for talking to Al Jazeera.
Thank you.
Very nice to talk to you.
Thank you very much.